Good morning and welcome to our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Coming up on the program today, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says Israel needs several months to win in Gaza. Hamas spokesperson Osama Hamdan boasts of flood-resistant tunnels in Beirut news conference. Plus, suspected Hamas members arrested in Europe over alleged terrorism plot. Thank you for joining us today. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has met with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss the war in Gaza. White House spokesperson John Kirby says the plan was to discuss the need to be more accurate in strikes. Israel has ignored calls for a ceasefire, including a resolution at the UN Security Council blocked by a US veto last week and another that passed overwhelmingly in the General Assembly this week. Top US General Charles Brown will join Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin for meetings in Israel in the coming days. Major General Patrick Ryder told the press conference that it will be General Brown's first trip to the Middle East since becoming chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Mr. Austin will leave for his Middle East trip on December the 16th and will also visit Qatar and Bahrain.
And Secretary Austin will travel to the Middle East region on December 16th to meet with leaders in Bahrain, Qatar, and Israel. In Bahrain, the Secretary will meet with the Crown Prince and Prime Minister to thank him and discuss the important role Bahrain continues to play in enabling regional security, especially for maritime operations. He will also underscore the Combined Maritime Task Force's vital role in protecting critical international waterways in the region. Additionally, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown Jr., will join Secretary Austin in Israel for meetings with senior Israeli officials. This will be General Brown's first trip to the Middle East as chairman.
Israel Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has explained to visiting White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan that it will take several months to defeat Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Mr. Gallant claims that Hamas has been building its infrastructure under the ground and above the ground for over a decade, and that to destroy the group will require a long period of time and will last more than several months, but it will be successful. The two also discussed the need to return Israel to their homes near the border with Lebanon after tens of thousands of people were displaced due to fighting with Iran-backed Hezbollah.
The Hamas is a terror organization that built itself for a decade to fight Israel. And they build infrastructure under the ground and on the ground. And it is not easy to destroy them. It will take and require a long period of time. It will last more than several months. But we will win and we will destroy them. So thank you once again for coming to Israel, for helping us, and for supporting us.
A senior U.S. official is warning that Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar's days are numbered. He made the statement following the meetings in Israel between the United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Israeli officials. Noting that several Americans were killed in the October 7 attack by Hamas, the official says Sinwar had U.S. blood on his hands. Israel has publicly accused Mr. Sinwar of being the mastermind behind Hamas' terror attack against Israel, although experts say he's likely to be one of several, making him one of the key targets of its war in Gaza. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for Hamas, Osama Hamdan, is boasting that the group built its tunnels to withstand possible attempts to pump water into them. Mr. Hamdan was speaking at a news conference in Beirut on Thursday in response to reports of potential flooding of tunnels by Israeli forces inside Gaza. He added that all consequences and expected attacks have been taken into account. Israel has told the United States it's begun carefully testing flooding some of the tunnels with seawater on a limited basis to assess whether the operational could be scaled up to degrade the group's tunnel network on a larger scale. Israeli officials have assured their American counterparts that they're only doing this in tunnels where they do not believe hostages are being held. Separately, Mr. Hamdan addressed the issue of possible fresh talks aimed at releasing more hostages held inside Gaza, appearing to lower any expectations of progress. There are still more than 130 hostages held inside the enclave. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shiataye believes that international pressure on the Palestinian Authority to overhaul its leadership and step up reforms are a distraction from the need for a political horizon to lay the basis for peace after the Gaza war. He was speaking in an interview calling for an international intervention to end the decades-long conflict, adding that the United States, the country with the most regional clout, had so far failed to use its influence effectively. Plans for the future in Gaza, once Israeli forces end their week-long invasion, have remained nebulous, but there is broad international support for a leading role to be assigned to the Palestinian Authority, which currently exercises limited governance in the occupied West Bank. However, the Palestinian Authority, the body created in the wake of the 1993 Oslo Accords, has been plagued by accusations of inefficiency and corruption, with Washington pressing for a shake-up in the leadership around the 88-year-old President Mahmoud Abbas.
So, what we need is a day after for all of the Palestinian territories. What we need is to see an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the materialization and manifestation of a two-state solution. So for us, the issue is give us a political horizon. We need American measures to support the two states. That's what they are saying. So the issue for us is not, whether we reform the health sector or we reform local government sector or this and that. And so that's not the issue. The issue for us is that Palestinians have been suffering for 75 years. And the people who talk about two-state solution, okay, the two-state solution has become like international anthem. It's just people, they need measures on the ground. That is the thing. That should not be there. So United States can put serious pressure on the Israelis. United States can tell Israel to stop the war. Today what is needed is for the United Nations Security Council to say with a very clear timetable that this Israeli occupation that has occurred on the Palestinian territories since 1967 should end, and this is the timetable that should be given to the Israelis, to the Palestinians, to end this conflict.
Four alleged Hamas members suspected of plotting terror attacks on European soil have been arrested by German and Dutch authorities. This was contained in a statement by Germany's federal prosecutor on Thursday. 3 people were arrested in Germany and 1 in the Netherlands on suspicion of planning attacks on Jewish institutions in Europe, according to the prosecutor. Of the 3 arrested in Germany, 2 are Lebanese nationals, while the other is an Egyptian national. The 4th person arrested in the Netherlands is said to be a Dutch national. We now speak with Associate Professor of International Relations and Diplomacy and former Dean of Social Sciences, Penn Resource University, Gombe, Mukhtar Imam. Mr. Imam is reaching us virtually from Abuja. He's also the author of U.S. Interest in the Israeli Occupation of Palestine, Implications for the Two-State Solution. Good morning and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
Maybe that's where we shall begin. The two-state solution, how feasible is it at this time?
Well, it's appearing more bleak by the day. The possibilities of a two-state solution are waning by the hour, particularly with the unfolding events from the period of October 7th. It has become even more pessimistic, so to speak, of ever having a two-state solution. And of course, as I noted in my book, the role of the United States basically as an arbiter in this conflict has been labeled, and not just labeled, but shelved in a lot of gray ethical areas that have not basically proven or given the sort of impetus and confidence building that the Palestinians should have, and not just the Palestinians, but people of good conscience and people in general all over the world. And so, quite frankly, the two-state solution doesn't appear to be a viable solution to the conflict anymore, not at this time. We hope to see an end to this conflict real quick, so that the events that might unfold after the conflict might see some kind of political solution to this very dreadful and, inhumane situation that we're witnessing currently in Palestine.
Indeed, dreadful can even be at this time be said to be an understatement, with the sufferings happening in the Gaza Strip. Well over 16,000 to 18,000 people having lost their lives. According to the Gazan Health Ministry, the humanitarian conditions are nothing to write home about. But the two-state solution is a long-term objective. For the short term, you say you're pessimistic about that two-state solution, but for the short term, what do you think will be able to bring both parties back to negotiations?
Well, the issue about with the Palestinian conflict is that it is one that is one of the most complex, one of the most multi-layered and multifaceted and multidimensional conflict in recent time. But then has a particular pattern, so to speak, because when you look at the conflict in its entirety, from how it has evolved to where it is today, one thing is cardinal, is central to the entire conflict, and it is about possession of land. Whether short-term, medium-term, long-term, the solution remains the same. It has to have a political solution, and that solution requires having an understanding and an embrace, a complete wholehearted embrace of the global consensus. Because all that we are talking about here has been talked about over the years, from the period of 1917, or better placed from 1948, when the State of Israel became an official entity, up till today. And this global consensus basically is something that the United Nations has passed a resolution on. Particularly the United Nations Security Council, the Resolution 242 and Resolution 181, which speaks to the existence of two states living independent side by side one another, and the other which speaks about the existence of the Palestinian state, and an end to the occupation and an end to the establishment of settlement, which is also very critical to ending the conflict. So what needs to be done to bring a succor, to bring an end to this incessant conflict, is to look at that global consensus, which, again, like I said, have been talked about over the years. But as far as this, the militarization is concerned, as far as the boots on ground is concerned, to be able to put an end to that at this time requires the United States. It's very obvious. You do not need a soothsayer to tell you this. The United States is the entity with the strongest will, with the strongest bargaining position, with the strongest chip over the state of Israel, to be able to put a halt to this bloody conflict, to the maiming and precipitation and decapitation of children and women and men and civilian population in the Gaza Strip and in West Bank. So to put an end to the conflict is very crucial. To put an end to the war, which is ongoing, is even much more crucial. And the United States, like I said, is the one that has all that it takes. Imagine what just happened at the Security Council with the resolution that was passed, and the United States vetoed it, the only country to veto it. Even the United Kingdom, whom under the Balfour Declaration brought about the existence of the State of Israel, abstained, yet the US vetoed it. I mean, how do you veto the killing of over 7,000 children and a decapitation of over 1,000 children and so on and so forth? It is just unbecoming, and it requires an urgent halt. And the United States, like I said, has the final say to all of this.
Would you take on board the Israeli arguments that a ceasefire now, even though it is humanitarian-wise, will be good for the people of Gaza, thereby eliminating civilian casualties, but that it will make their objective of eliminating Hamas impossible?
Well, the truth of the matter is, again, I take you back a bit. I just told you earlier that this conflict appears to be multidimensional, it is multifaceted, and it is quite complex. The argument, or those who throw the argument that the humanitarian ceasefire, which is basically what pundits in Israel, the war cabinet in Israel, including the Prime Minister himself, Bibi, have consistently talked about, that a humanitarian halt will lead the Hamas to reinforce and will be quite difficult for them to win the war. That's the Israelis. But the truth of the matter is this, that when you ask very critical questions, it leads you to some kind of understanding. How many Hamas militants, so-called militants, have been killed since October 7th? Vis-a-vis the number of civilian casualties that we have witnessed, vis-a-vis the kind of dreadfulness, the kind of horror that the world is witnessing coming out of the Gaza Strip, which has moved even the vice president, the second most important person in the United States, to say, look, we have to put an end to this. This is barbaric. So a humanitarian force is very important. Those who throw that argument are bringing an argument that is simplistic and reductionist to the point of being outrightly criminal. And that is what this is. You're witnessing a genocide unfold, and you speak to Hamas. Hamas, by the way, is, frankly speaking, not just a face. It is an ideology. It is a movement. It is a struggle for liberation. And that's the reason why you find that Hamas as an entity has gained so much popularity and sympathy amongst not just the Palestinian population, but it is growing amongst the Arab states, which is quite unusual, you know, given, for those who understand the evolution of Hamas as an entity. So it speaks a lot to the conscience and consciousness of individuals who are in position of authority and people who are pundits and analysts. There is no logic to say continue the war because you're trying to get rid of Hamas. How do you get rid of an ideology? But it's obvious that the end game for Israel is to do what Ilan Pappy has said in his book, ethnically cleanse Palestine, what Noam Chomsky have constantly talked about, who, by the way, are professors and Jews themselves, not of the 13th tribe, original Jews. They have talked about, and this is the pointer of all of this is to that direction, that they're trying to ethnically cleanse Palestine. Else, why is there resolution 1129 or decision 1129 by the Israeli parliament in the heat of a war for the upscaling and industrial erection of settlements in the occupied spaces? And by the way, that has been the cardinal argument of the Palestinians, right from the King Abdullah peace process through to the Oslo Accord, which you talked about in your opening, up to the Barack Obama peace process, and even the Abraham Accord of the former president, Donald Trump. The argument has always been, halt the illegal settlement of buildings, and we come to the table and have a conversation. But no, the Israelis have rather turned their back on that singular demand, which the Palestinians, and not just the Palestinians, but the global consensus has spoken about.
So this brings us back to the vicious cycle of October the 7th, the terror attacks. Do you consider Hamas being an ideology, as you have mentioned, that those actions taken by Hamas in targeting civilians and taking hostage over 240 people, as we know, and still keeping over 137 people hostage, consistent with an ideology that should be supported across the board?
Well, your question is actually very subjective. It will depend on whom you're talking to. There is no rational sort of answer. It's not a yes or no issue. Very quickly, you see, for you to understand or make any analysis that is devoid of emotions and sentiments, You must put 4 cardinal principles into perspective. You must understand trend, you must understand consistency, you must be coherent, and you must be logical. Once you understand the trend, the evolution of a situation, you tend to understand how it has transcended to where it is currently. Now, once you do that, the tendency is that you become coherent in your argument. When you're coherent in your argument, the tendency is for you to be consistent. When you're consistent, the tendency is for you to be logical. Now, out of every political discourse or analysis, what you're trying to deduce is logic, nothing short of it. For you to understand this situation, you must look at it holistically. The crisis, what is termed a war, which by the way is a wrong connotation for what is currently playing out between the Israelis and the Palestinians or Hamas, did not start on October 7th. It started long before that. These are people who have been subjugated, who have been oppressed, who have been occupied, who have been colonized. This is colonization in the 21st century and apartheid. This is what is playing out in that land. For anybody who understands the history of that place, from the 1st of November or 2nd of November of 1917, when the first influx of Jews came into the Palestinian land, while it was 100% Palestinian, including 22% Coptic Christians. So when you go into history, we do not want to become revisionist and go all about that. But the reality is, from that period up till now, when you look at the amount of, the Palestinians have never been on the offensive, not once. Anybody who gives you that mumbo jumbo is making a misrepresentation of history.
What about the first and second intifada?
This is not.
Sorry, Mr. Mukhtar. Sorry to jump in. You may continue your train of thought. You may continue, but I had to interrupt you. So what about the first and second intifada?
Yeah, if you understand what an intifada is, the word intifada is a struggle. It is an armed struggle. People don't just wake up to struggle with arms. And what arms did the Palestinians use at that time? Them guns and stones. The point is, where you find anybody saying, I'm doing an intifada, an armed struggle, it is because he feels he has been oppressed or his land has been taken over us and encroachment has happened. This is what you call an intifada, a struggle. Before the Intifada started in 1948, there was the Nakba. The Nakba saw the death of over 200,000 Palestinians. These are people who belong to families. What do you expect of your families? They are not woods. I'm not saying people should take up arms or do this thing, but I'm only saying let's be realistic with our analysis. You see, people today, let's take the example of what is happening currently. A man will tell you 40 members of my family have been killed. A 5-year-old has had his face blown away. 10 years from now, you want that child to shake an American president's hand and let's walk down the road and sing the song We Will Overcome. Are you being realistic? I mean, so we have to understand, even the members of the so-called Hamas, and this is what Griffith is trying to say, the UN spokesperson in that region, and he's saying that whatever political decision or solution must be sought must be inclusive of Hamas itself as an entity, because they have been pushed to where they are. So what I am saying is, once you understand this trend, and again, I hope I have cleared the issue of the Intifada, it was an armed struggle against what began or transpired from the period of 1948, which is the famous word now people talk about, the Nakba, the Nakba. The Nakba was a systemic cleansing of the Palestinians to chase them out of their homes militarily, physically, through settler aggression, through the use of propaganda and so on and so forth, which is basically what we see playing out now. White phosphorus being used, pamphlet being thrown to Palestinians and asking them to leave, else they will die. And, you know, this sort of aggression, subtle aggression, subliminal messages being passed, and the use of force and aggression is exactly what has led the situation to where it is today. And so, justifying the position of Hamas on its action on October 7 is not something that anybody has tried to do. As an academic, I have spoken on this platform and I have said that what Hamas did on October 7 is something that is condemnable. It doesn't confirm with any of the international humanitarian laws, and it also doesn't confirm with any of the Siyara of the Muslim jurisprudence. Because long before the Geneva Convention, long before the Vienna Convention, the treaty, the Sierra, had been existing for over 1,400 years ago, and it speaks to the rules of engagement in war. Thou shalt not burn down a church, a mosque, a synagogue, do not cut down trees, do not take captives of civilians who are unarmed. And when even the armed people come to you to say we need succor for the night before the war starts the next day, Islam says grant them succor. So basically, we have talked about that, and I have mentioned that on several occasions. But is that a justification for taking off the heads of over 4,000 children? I mean, look at what transpired when there was the exchange of hostages, which is clearly what Hamas is trying to do, to find a bargaining chip, to be able to take out over 7,000 Palestinians who have been in Israeli detention, either on administrative detention or on frivolous grounds. None of the Israelis were hurt. It was obvious. And the Israelis themselves have retracted to say the Palestinians did not kill civilians. Rather, it was their own, it was an own go, an own thing that happened with their helicopters or their machines. So this speaks to some of the things that are unfolding. And that's the reason why you find that the empathy or sympathy towards the Israelis have waned over the years across the world. This is not just a Nigerian or a Palestinian or an Arab thing. Across the world, it's waning. It's a humanity question here. And so that act is not justified, but the counteraction is even more condemnable, because this is collective punishment, cutting out light, cutting out water, letting people starve, blowing up houses, killing families. It's barbaric, and there is no place for that in the 21st century.
Going forward, do you think that, or what is your opinion concerning the hostages that are being kept in Gaza at this time? Will that be a basis for negotiations if these hostages were released?
Well, that's a very good question. Actually, the idea for me, from where I sit, to my mind, or I mean, trying to understand the mind frame of the Palestinian militants is that we need to have a bargaining chip to be able to exchange something. But then the reality is that that bargaining chip is beginning to wane very quickly. Because obviously, for a number of reasons, obviously the number of hostages that are held captive or were held captive by Hamas is beginning to decline. We're also witnessing, obviously, that Israel is not Israel in this context, but then Benjamin Netanyahu is obviously the winner, or the most triumphant of these circumstances that we're currently witnessing, because this is an individual who faces a lot of political crisis at home. There is the threat with the judiciary and his reform that he brought, which basically has led to a series of petitions for his impeachment and so on and so forth. So the longer the war goes on, particularly for Benjamin Netanyahu, it is a political plus for him. So I think while that might be a bargaining chip for Hamas, I'm no war expert, but while that might be a bargaining chip for them, I think it's beginning to wane drastically. But then on the flip side, part of the plus that may have come from that is the fact that these captives that were held, which was basically used by the Israeli propaganda war machine to say it's a justification for the continuous war, has sort of also taken another dimension, because the world has seen, cameras have shown, we have watched that these hostages are coming out of the Hamas captive cells, smiling and shaking hands and so on and so forth. You see, that's an impression, that's a perception that is being put out there, and it's being bought so rapidly by not just state actors but non-state actors as well. So it goes to speak to the reason why pressure will be mounted on the Israelis and the Israeli government to say, look, this is not enough for you to continue to use white phosphorus on these individuals. It is not enough for you to continue to use the bombings and so on and so forth. And so people of conscience are beginning to speak, and it's a good thing. But the reality of the matter is, as far as the position of the United States is concerned, they haven't done enough, and I do not see them doing enough. And there's something people have to understand about the US. You don't listen to what the US says, you listen to what they do. The Biden administration is talking about the Israelis ensuring that they reduce the casualty or minimize the casualty, civilian casualty in the strip from the north to the south, yet in one breath refusing to sell rifles, assault rifles to the Israeli government, and in the other breath, at the same time, shipping in more sophisticated armories and weaponry into Israel to continue to wage the war. It's double standard, and that's the textbook definition of hypocrisy.
We thank you for your views and contribution this morning, Mr. Mukhtar. Mr. Mukhtar is an associate professor of international relations and diplomacy and a former dean of social sciences, Penn Resource University, Gombe. Mr. Mukhtar Umam, who joined us from Abuja, many thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the second half of today's coverage of Israel-Hamas war. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has met with the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Mirjana Spoljaric. According to a statement by the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Netanyahu described in his words the atrocities carried out by Hamas to the ICRC President. He also presented her with a package of medicine demanding the Red Cross deliver it to the hostages in Gaza. Spoljaric met earlier with families of hostages in Tel Aviv.
There's a difference between the deliberate and systematic murder, maiming, and menacing of civilians, which is what terrorism is, and the unintended consequences, unintended casualties that accompany any war. And this is the entire difference. And I want to express my gratitude for your help in supporting the release of the hostages. But at the same time, some of the statements that have come out from the organization seem to not make the distinction that I've just made.
Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Meanwhile, Israeli special forces have recovered the body of a hostage in Gaza. 28-year-old Elia Toledano was taken hostage at the Supernova Music Festival on October the 7th, along with his friend Maya Shem, who was freed 2 weeks ago during the temporary pause in fighting. Toledano's body has been returned to Israel, where it was identified by medical officers and police. Toledano Elia had been taken hostage by Hamas during its October 7 attacks in Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces said in a statement he was 28 years of age. The United Nations has issued a statement warning the tragic consequences of the conflict will be disproportionately borne by women and girls for generations. The statement adds that pregnant women, young children, older persons, and persons living with disabilities are at higher risk of communicable diseases, malnutrition, and death, all of which become increasingly likely as Gaza's civilian infrastructure collapses. The United Nations warns the interruption to housing, schooling, and healthcare will destroy already fragile future of young girls in Gaza. Our next guest is public affairs analyst, Mr. Ralph Obasoje. Mr. Obasoje is speaking to us virtually from Coventry in the UK. Welcome to the program. Good morning. Mr. Obasoje, if you can hear me, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Is that supposed to be me, Olumide? Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Obasoje. Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah.
We can hear you. We can see you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
It's a pleasure to have you. You're in the UK. Let's start from there. The court of public opinion, the jury seems to be out on the Israel-Palestinian situation vis-a-vis the war against Hamas. And according to some, Israel is losing that war. In the UK, where there's been many protests, what do you see on the ground, and what is your opinion?
Yeah, what you see on the ground here is that the ordinary folks, the teeming population in the UK are against the Israeli action or the way the Israelis are prosecuting the war. But the big corporates have been very silent because perhaps people have been talking about the fear of government subtle reprisals. So whether it's in the US or in the UK, you don't hear the big corporates making voicing anything against the Israeli action. But what is a bit positive since about 2 days is the actions of Kamala Harris, who has come out, the US Vice President, who has differed with her boss. And he's saying, sorry, you can't be endorsing genocide. You can't be endorsing what seems like ethnic cleansing. You must then rein in Israel. And so I think that has brought out Biden's statement this morning, telling Israel to prosecute the war with less devastation, more pragmatically to minimize just one action too late. You know, I have spoken on this channel before about the lopsidedness of the actions of the Western powers, and the fact that I had thought that at the very beginning, while Israeli forces were still at the borders, the Western world and the influencing nations could have been able to broker a ceasefire and actually put some peacekeeping force at the border as a buffer, and they would still have achieved the release of hostages. Everyone knows that once in a while, Hamas takes hostages just as a bargaining power for them to get to release their own leaders who are being held in Israeli jails. They do that once in a while. So nobody has heard now whether any of the hostages they've taken had been killed or not. But all they just wanted was a bargaining chip. No one supports the taking of hostages. Nobody supports the actions of the Hamas. But when you take a historical perspective and you see what has been on the ground, seizure of territories and rationing of life-supporting items like water and so on and so forth in Gaza, you would then not blame people who are pushed to the wall. So, but we thought that the action of the world, of the civilized world, of those who are humane, those who support humanity, should have been earlier than now. And that was what I spoke last time, Lumide, when you spoke to me to say, when I said the actions of the UK, for instance, and European Union was so slow. Now they are seeing the disaster on the ground. Nobody should support children being killed, children sleeping and bombs snubs the life out of them. Nobody should support women being killed. Yes, you can engage combatants and annihilate them if you want, but so that is what is on ground here.
You raised an interesting point, Mr. Obasanjo. Were you saying, but before I say that, you said hostages, yes, there are about 20 hostages, according to the IDF, that are dead already, and we understand that their corpses are being held by Hamas. Are they also bargaining chips, the corpses of these individuals? And then, were you saying that if Israel had been more patient, since Hamas had prior not taking hostages, the IDF has said that they had 4 hostages in Hamas captivity before October 7, that if they had been more patient, that they would still have gotten the release of these hostages?
No, I wouldn't do that. Nobody would. It would be unfair to say, to use any word to say Israel should be patient. No nation should be patient when they are hostages. What I was saying is that the action of the moderating powers, the world powers like the US, the UK, Germany, if they had stepped in, that would have reassured Israel that they will get their citizens back. Nobody should be telling Israel to be patient because the Israel is retaliating, acting with anger and wanting to free their own citizens. But what I'm saying is that, like those Israelis that are found, Israel bombards a place and then sees the corpse of one of the hostages. Who then killed the hostage? Is it Hamas? I don't know if you are following my logic. Because everywhere they have retrieved 3, 4 bodies of one or few of the hostages. It was areas they have massively bombarded. And you know Hamas will continue moving those hostages as Israel is getting clear. I mean, as Israeli forces are getting closer. So they also know, Hamas is not stupid. They also know that if they harm any of the hostages, they've lost their bargaining power. I am not supporting any of the actions, okay? I am saying that it is a civilized world, okay? Like they were putting weapons, supplying weapons to Israel. They were supplying troops to it does not make for peace. What some of us are calling for is that there are actions, there are proactive actions that would have been taken. I don't know if you will get to that stage, but just visit the Oslo Accord. The Oslo Accord was a mirror of the Camp David Accord. What did it provide for? It was because of those accords, Israel ceded Galilee, Israel ceded Bethlehem, and one other territory, very significant and religious territories, and also returned the Mount Sinai villages to Egypt. But unfortunately, our Sadat paid with his life for what he believed in. And what they condemned our Sadat for was what Yasser Arafat eventually signed in the Oslo Agreement. Some of us are saying, when you look at those agreements, they were robust enough to have been implemented. Why have they not been implemented in full? Because they both provided for, they were to negotiate what Jerusalem status would be. The Camp David Accord said Jerusalem should be an international territory under the mandate of the United Nations, because the issue of Jerusalem was very contentious. And the Oslo Accord provided that the status of Jerusalem should be negotiated in the future. So the Palestinians were to have a state, and Israel will have a state. But this was missed out in 1948, 1947, 1948. In 1947, that was the United Nations recommendation. Out of the former mandate territory of Palestine, which was administered by the UK, then they were to create the state of Israel and the state of Palestine, two separate countries. And the UN then said in their vote in 1947 that Jerusalem status will be negotiated going forward. But before it is negotiated, it will be under the mandate of the UN. And if that had been done, Olumide, I don't think all this carnage would be there. Every average Palestinian, just take a Palestinian of 60 years old, slightly below my age. They all grew up, they were born into war, and they grew up in an atmosphere of war. So why would such persons be very aggressive in that attitude? When I encounter the average Palestinian, they are very aggressive, and I understand where they are coming from. It's an unfortunate situation that we are facing in Gaza and in the Holy Land.
Concerning the hostages, concerning the hostages that we just spoke of, you said that you are inferring that possibly the hostages' deaths being deceased and the fatalities came about as a result of the Israeli bombing. Can we be sure of that?
What I was just saying is, you check where the Israeli army recovered those bodies. The territories are under their control. The whole of Gaza is ringed in, all the borders. And they tell hostages, okay, leave the north, goes down south. In Rabalia, in Rafah, they are still bombing those places. And then when they've taken over a territory where they have chased out militants and they have bombed massively, they then say they've recovered the body of one of the hostages. If they recover the bodies of the hostages in a place that is not under their control, let them also show it. You understand? And when you are bombarding a territory, every object there is a target. Every object is a target. Like I told you, check the history of Hamas right from time. Hamas has kept hostages for 4 years, 5 years. They never harmed them because they know that if they kill that hostage, for instance, they've extinguished their own bargaining chips. So they provide doctors, and when the hostages are released, they will tell you, oh, they were well fed, and doctors were treating them. So I do not see, under this circumstance where Hamas is, how will I call it, is the underdog and they don't have anything again to live for. For them, or 5 hostages have been found so far. But one thing I noted while I was monitoring this across various news channels is to find out that where they were found were places that have been taken over by Israel, already bombarded by Israel before they took it over. So if Hamas, and Hamas is not a cowardly organization. They do something, they own up to it. So I've not also heard Hamas saying, yes, we killed our hostage to warn you not to bombard us again. They've not said it. Anything they've done, they will own up. When Hezbollah sent some missiles into northern Israel, they owned up and did it.
In the October 7 attack, Mr. Obasanjo,
and when they did,
in the October 7 attack, Hamas said they called it a military operation and that they didn't target civilians. That was not accurate, obviously. So would you trust anything they would say after the October 7 attack? Not to talk of the prior incidents that have happened over the decades in their rule over Gaza. They called it a military operation, the October 7 attack. Was that a military operation?
Yes, let us contextualize this. Yes, let us contextualize this. Both sides have engaged in propaganda. And whenever you have war, like during the Nigerian Civil War, they had the chief propagandist, Ajulu Chukwu or something, Chukwumerije. They are all there. You have to hype up your things. But let me tell you something. Why would it be qualified as a military operation? Because any average Palestinian you see now, because of the historical antecedents, whether they are medical doctors or engineers, they are all trained as fighters. Every average Israeli you see above 18 years old is a trained soldier. So if they take them in civilian uniform, it doesn't make them not to be soldiers. They are reservists and they are soldiers. I was in a senior executive course in Israel for 6 weeks, and we taught every military formation. And you can see how the Israeli society is organized. Very productive society, but every single person you meet as an Israeli who is above 18 years is a trained soldier. He must have done 2 years of military service. And then the same thing with the Palestinians, because they know that they can wake up and face, how will I call it, military action from the opposing side. They are all also trained. So I will not be surprised if you see the average Palestinian adult in his house, he will have a weapon under his bed. It's all different. So when they term it military operation, I don't have to contest it with them. No, but
what about the rape? What about the rape of the women? What about the killing of the children? What about the raping of the women? The killing of civilians across the board on October 7? And what was that?
I think when the parliament, the Israeli Knesset was cross-examining and questioning Netanyahu, where they were saying that it seems that the government did not take enough precautionary and protective measures to forestall the hostage taking of October 7. The Prime Minister did say, which I watched live in Knesset, to say there was limited military cover. All the Israeli kibbutz are guided. And when somebody is coming with a force and they are resisted, the first thing in their mind is to annihilate, to extinguish the opposition. So I want to drill into that, but that does not justify, in your mind, Olumide, does that justify the massive killing of, like Kamala Harris called it? He said this looks like.
We'll have to leave it there, Mr. Obasanjo. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you. We'll have to leave it there. We'll run out of time, but we appreciate the time you've made for us this morning and your contributions. Much appreciated. Thank you for coming on the program today.
Always my pleasure, Olumide. Thank you very much.
Now, that is Mr. Ralph Obasanjo, who joined us from Coventry in the UK, public affairs analyst. Now, a Jewish protest group demanding a ceasefire in Israel's war in Gaza blocked the major highway in Philadelphia, stalling rush hour traffic. Members of Jewish Voice for Peace protested in 8 U.S. cities to mark the 8th night of Hanukkah, also blocking commuter traffic on streets and bridges in Washington, in Boston, Atlanta, Chicago, Minneapolis, Seattle, and Portland, Oregon. Philadelphia's Expressway and the Spring Garden Street Bridge reopened to traffic after protesters dispersed.
We are not afraid. We'll fight for liberation, 'cause we know that's why we're made. No more genocide. No more genocide.
And we should
From Washington to the UK, from the US to the Middle East, reactions continue as the conflict between Israel and Hamas remains. Thank you for watching our coverage of Israel-Hamas war this morning. I'm Olumide Macaulay. See you again.